We see survey results pretty much everywhere, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Political polls, customer feedback.
Exactly. What people think about, well, anything. But do we really stop and think about what's behind those numbers? How do they actually capture what, a whole bunch of people are thinking?
It's a great question. How do we take the pulse of a whole community or even a nation?
Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're doing a deep dive into social surveys. They're really a cornerstone method for gathering information. You see them everywhere, especially in sociology.
Right. They're trying to understand everything from, say, voting patterns to how happy people are with local services.
So our mission today is to pull back the curtain a bit. We'll look at what social surveys actually are, the different kinds you might encounter, and then really critically, their strengths, what makes them powerful, but also some maybe surprising limitations.
Yeah, and I think it's just so important for you as a listener to get a handle on the mechanics behind all this information you see daily. Because knowing how the data gets collected is honestly just as crucial as the data itself. It helps you understand the context.
Right. So if we want to decode the data, let's start right at the beginning. What actually is a social survey? What makes it different from just, I don't know, chatting with a few people?
Good starting point. So, at its heart, a social survey is really just a method for collecting information about a large number of people. The key there is large number.
Not just one or two.
Exactly. It's about scale. So instead of a really deep, long chat with one person, you're casting a much wider net. Usually it involves asking everyone the same set of questions.
Okay.
And that can happen face-to-face or over the phone or maybe using a written questionnaire like something you get in the mail or click through online.
And the sources mention this makes surveys the classic tool of positivist research. That sounds a bit jargony, maybe.
It can, yeah. But positivist here just means focusing on stuff you can objectively measure.
So numbers.
Pretty much. Surveys generate a large amount of quantitative data, hard numbers, things you can count, categorize, run stats on.
Right, which lets you do that powerful analysis, find patterns.
That's the main goal, really, to
Yeah.
gather data that helps identify patterns, trends, and correlations between different social variables.
Okay, like the example in the source.
Yeah.
Asking people about their education level and their income.
Yeah, and then sociologists can use that data to see if there's actually a link between the two across the whole group.
Mm.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is how surveys let us get beyond just individual stories, beyond anecdotes.
Right, because my experience might be totally different from yours.
Exactly. Surveys help us step back and see the bigger picture, the broader societal forces at play. They use data to make things visible that you just wouldn't see otherwise, like that education income link across a whole city. You can't get that from just talking to a few neighbors.
You need the scale.
You need the scale to spot those patterns, trends, and correlations.
That makes sense. Seeing the forest, not just the trees, as you said. Now, the material points out that the way you conduct the survey, its format, really matters, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The format impacts what it's good for, where it works well, and where it struggles.
Okay, so let's get into the two main types our sources talk about. First up, questionnaires.
Right. These are basically the written ones.
Yeah, written surveys. You can send them by post, email, hand them out in person, like maybe a feedback form after you buy something.
That kind of thing, yeah. Designed to be pretty simple and get out to a lot of people.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. They're very cost-effective.
Huge advantage.
It really is. It means you don't need a massive budget to reach thousands of people. You can get data from a large and geographically dispersed group, like all across the country, maybe even internationally.
That reach is definitely a major plus. But, well, this raises an important question, doesn't it? What's the flip side?
Ah, yes. The trade-offs.
Well, for one, questionnaires often have a pretty low response rate. Let's be honest, a lot of them probably end up in the bin or deleted.
Yeah, people are busy.
And maybe more critically, the researcher isn't actually there, so they can't be there to clarify any questions.
Right. If a question is ambiguous or uses a word someone doesn't know.
Exactly. You might guess or interpret it differently than intended, and that leads to a real risk of misinterpretation. If enough people misunderstand, it can seriously skew your results.
That's a really key point, the misinterpretation risk. So if that's a weakness for questionnaires, how do structured interviews try to solve that?
Right.
That's the other main type, right? Conducted verbally.
Right. Face-to-face or over the phone, usually.
Yeah.
An interviewer asks the questions out loud.
And they use a preset list of questions, so everyone gets asked the exact same thing.
Precisely. The interviewer reads from a script, essentially.
Yeah.
And that standardization is a big strength.
Okay.
Because every interview is conducted in the same way, it really increases reliability.
Meaning it's consistent, like using the same measuring tape every time.
Good analogy. It ensures consistency. Plus, just having an interviewer there, a real person, can also improve the response rate.
People might be more likely to engage.
Often, yes. And, crucially, the interviewer can also help to avoid misunderstandings. They can clarify a question if someone's confused, addresses that misinterpretation risk we just talked about.
Okay, so better reliability, potentially better response rates, less confusion. Sounds good.
It is, but then you hit the other side of the trade-off again.
Ah, the catch.
The catch is that structured interviews are much more time-consuming and expensive.
Right. You need interviewers, maybe travel, training.
All of that. It adds up fast,
Yeah.
especially if you want a large sample. So you gain that clarity and interaction, but you often lose the sheer scale and cost-effectiveness of a questionnaire. You might end up surveying fewer people.
Which then affects how much you can generalize the findings, I suppose.
Exactly. It's always a balancing act.
It really sounds like it. Choosing the right tool for the job. Okay, so stepping back from the specific types, what about the big picture? What are the overall pluses and minuses that apply to social surveys in general? Things our listeners should really keep in mind.
Yeah, looking at the broader picture is helpful. Let's start with the strengths, because they are powerful tools.
Okay, number one seems to be high reliability. We touched on this, but maybe unpack it a bit more.
Sure, because they're structured and standardized, same questions, same order. They're highly repeatable.
Meaning?
Meaning, if another researcher did the exact same survey with a similar group, they should get pretty similar results. Another sociologist could conduct the same survey and get similar results, as the source puts it.
Right, consistency across studies. That sounds important for building knowledge over time.
Definitely. Then second, there's generalizability. This is a big one.
Okay.
Because surveys often use large representative samples, meaning the sample group mirrors the larger population they're studying. The findings can be generalized to the wider population.
So what you learn from, say, 1,000 people can tell you something about millions.
If the sample is properly representative, yes. You can make statistically informed statements about the larger group. It's incredibly useful for policy, for understanding public opinion on a national scale.
Wow, okay. And third?
Third is the quantitative data they produce.
The numbers again.
The numbers, yeah. This numerical data is easy to analyze. You can run statistical tests, look for those correlations, and rigorously test hypotheses. It's what allows for all those charts and graphs you see.
Makes sense. Allows you to connect dots like income and health or whatever it might be.
Precisely. So if you connect all this to the bigger picture, these strengths, reliability, generalizability, quantitative analysis, make surveys fantastic for mapping broad societal trends and testing large-scale theories. They give us a measurable snapshot.
Indispensable, really, for certain kinds of questions.
For sure.
But yeah, there's always a but. Despite these strengths, surveys have some pretty significant limitations, too. Things we really need to be aware of when we see those results.
Absolutely critical to understand the downsides.
Okay, one major one is described as a lack of validity. What does that mean in this context?
Well, it means surveys may not give us a full picture of people's lives because the questions are preset by the researcher.
Right. You can only answer what they ask.
Exactly, and often in fixed categories.
Yeah.
So they don't allow for the exploration of complex issues or the nuance of human experience. You might find out what people think, but not necessarily why in any great depth.
You lose the richness, the complexity of individual views.
You often do, yes. It's a snapshot, not a deep dive into someone's world. You get the what, but maybe miss the why or the how.
Okay. And then there's this specific phenomenon, the Hawthorne effect. That sounds intriguing.
It is. It relates particularly to those structured interviews where someone is talking to you directly. The core idea is that the presence of the interviewer can influence the respondent's answers. Well, think about it. If someone asks you something a bit sensitive, or something where there's a right answer socially.
Like, do you recycle properly?
Exactly. You might lean towards saying yes,
Yeah.
even if you sometimes slip up.
Yeah.
People might give socially desirable answers rather than their true opinion. They want to look good, basically.
Consciously or not, maybe.
Right. It can subtly skew answers towards what people think they should say, not necessarily what they actually do or believe.
That's a tricky one. And there's one more limitation mentioned, which sounds quite fundamental, imposing the researcher's meaning.
Yes, this is a deep one.
Hmm.
The source says the researcher decides what questions to ask and how to word them, meaning they are imposing their own framework on the research.
So the researcher's view of what's important shapes the whole thing from the start.
Pretty much. They set the agenda, they define the terms, they provide the categories for answers. Their perspective inevitably shapes the data that comes out.
It's like they're deciding what aspects of reality get measured and which ones don't.
That's a good way to put it. And this specific point, what raises a big philosophical question, especially for researchers called interpretivists.
Okay.
They see this imposition as a major problem. They argue it fundamentally doesn't capture the authentic meanings people attach to their own lives.
Because it's filtered through the researcher's lens.
Exactly. For interpretivists, real understanding comes from getting people's own words, their own perspectives, without those preset boxes. So you have this tension.
Between wanting broad patterns versus deep meaning.
Precisely. Surveys are brilliant for the broad, generalizable patterns, but they might sacrifice that deep, nuanced individual meaning. It's a classic trade-off in social science.
Okay, wow. So quite a lot to consider there. Let's try and sum this up for our listeners. What does this all mean, really?
Well, we've seen that social surveys are this key method for getting quantitative data from large groups.
Right, casting a wide net. And we've looked at the two main types. Questionnaires written, cost-effective, great reach, but maybe prone to misinterpretation.
In structured interviews, verbal, better clarity and reliability, but way more expensive and time-consuming.
And then we balanced the big strengths, their reliability, the power to generalize findings, the usefulness of that quantitative data.
Against those really important limitations, the potential lack of true validity or depth, that tricky Hawthorne effect where people might not give totally honest answers.
And the fundamental issue of the researcher inevitably imposing their own framework on the whole process.
Yeah, I think the main goal really is just to equip you, the listener, to look at survey data a bit more critically.
Not to dismiss it outright, but to understand it better.
Exactly. When you see a poll or a study result, having this background helps you be a more informed citizen, a smarter consumer of information. It's about asking, how did they get this number?
Okay, so maybe a final thought for people to take away.
Definitely.
Here's something to chew on. The next time you see a statistic that comes from a survey, just pause. Ask yourself, how might those questions have been worded? Who was asking them? Could that have nudged the answers in a certain direction?
Good questions to ask.
And maybe even more fundamentally, what isn't this survey telling me? What aspect of life, what complexity, what deeper why might be completely missing from this particular snapshot? It really makes you think differently about the data we see every day, doesn't it?